What do you think is the most interesting psychological phenomenon? Story 1: Psychosomatic symptoms. How you can have all these physical complaints or symptoms, but physiologically there's nothing causing it. How things can literally be all in your head. Super interesting. We're starting to move away from the belief that psychosomatic symptoms are actually caused by nothing physical. They are usually referred to as simply somatic now, as it is gradually understood how psychological distress can and does cause physical symptoms in the body. The barrier between mind and body is slowly being dismantled. For example, I have PTSD, and when I am highly stressed, I will experience hives, itching, and burning on my skin even when it's not been touched by anything. Story 2: Locus of control, LOC. LOC basically is how you view control over your own life. People either have an internal LOC where they believe they have the power to control their own lives, or an external LOC where they believe everything in life comes from a source other than yourself. I got fired because my boss hates me. I was late because of traffic, etc. Now what's interesting is that studies have shown people with an internal LOC find greater satisfaction and success in almost every aspect of life, except one. Being in a nursing home drives internal LOC people crazy, while external LOC people thrive. Story 3. I'm probably late to this thread, but I find the call of the void an interesting phenomenon. It's that feeling you get when you stand in a high place and subconsciously think, I could totally jump off right now. But you don't really want to, and you don't actually jump. I experienced this multiple times on my most recent trip to Europe. Story 4: Cotard delusion, aka walking corpse syndrome, where the sufferer genuinely believes that they are dead, don't exist, or have no internal organs. Absolutely crazy. I can't imagine what it feels like walking around feeling actually genuinely dead. I experienced this for a period of time after my dad passed away when I was younger. It was terrifying and traumatic. I felt as if I was hollow inside, with no organs or vessels, just empty muscle, and was a ghost that everyone else could see. Thankfully, those delusions don't plague my life anymore, but it was so dark and awful. Story 5. If you get yourself to be really happy and excited to see other people, they will react the same to you. It doesn't always happen the first time, but it will definitely happen next time. Time and again, this has always worked fine for me. Story 6. The placebo effect. The idea that belief in something can actually have a positive impact on the body just seems so crazy to me. Also helped me realize inversely why stress and anxiety can take such a toll on you. Funny enough, a placebo also works. When you know it's a placebo, somehow deep down there is something in you that wants to believe despite all reasonable arguments against it. Also, nocebo is a thing. When you expect something to harm you, it will. It makes a lot of treatments complicated. On one hand, you want the patient aware of the side effects. On the other, you don't want them to generate them by the nocebo effect. Story 7. How I can have a surprise in my dream? Like something will happen and I'll be confused about it. Then someone will explain it by giving new information, and then it makes sense. But all of this is created by my own brain while I'm dreaming. How can I reveal new information to myself to explain something? Story 8. Playing. When two animals play with each other, they both communicate aggression, they show fangs and claws, they bite, they go for the neck, etc. Everything about it should communicate danger, but they never feel endangered, even when one animal accidentally hurts another. This happens even when animals are playing with animals they have barely known for some time. It blows my mind how the right context completely transforms all the communication between animals who play. Story 9. Dissociative disorders. A dissociative disorder is a mental disorder that involves experiencing a disconnection and lack of continuity between thoughts, memories, surroundings, actions, and identity. People with dissociative disorders escape reality in ways that are involuntary and unhealthy and cause problems with functioning in everyday life. This was me in school as a result of early childhood trauma. I used to write texts in which I wondered what was going on and why things were like that. Like a movie that you're watching but have no involvement in. I also used to have this kind of awake dreams in stressful situations where I would just space the out and have all these random thoughts and images that I was not in control of. Story 10 for me, it is the unconscious mind and the fact that it accounts for the majority of our cognitive activity. I think it's interesting how we can simultaneously both know and not know things. It is also interesting and perhaps even frightening that we are not running the show to the extent that we think we are, at least not consciously. Story 11, dreaming. Even though everyone does it, it's amazing that our minds create virtual realities for us at night. If you can lucid dream, it can be more entertaining than any game technology has invented. I find dreaming fascinating, not just how dreams occur and their functions, but how they affect your memories and emotions too. In dreams, memories can be so different from real life. You can dream of someone you don't know, who is completely made up only to feel like you knew them forever, complete with a set of memories together. The intensity of emotions is heightened as well, and you can stop feeling those emotions upon waking up. Story 12. I'm amazed at the number of people who freeze in a disastrous situation like a sinking ship. People who survive tragedies like that always report that there's not nearly the amount of panic and confusion that you'd expect. A lot of people freeze in place and simply can't move, even as the water rises around them. Families have been split up in situations like this, where two of them can move, but the other three can't. Story 13. The monkey sphere. Simply put, how your brain has evolved to have an upper limit on the number of people you can conceptualize as people, after which they just become people, and are then clumped into groups. The perception of this can be warped drastically by hearsay, the media, your own bias, etc. This goes a very long way to explain why many things in human society are the way they are. Story 14. The gambler's fallacy. Specifically, how the same series of events can lead to two different conclusions. Assume you have a perfectly fair coin, you toss it 5 times and get 5 heads. You then ask 2 people what they think the 6th toss will be. Person A thinks that heads are obviously on a roll, so he bets on heads. Person B thinks that heads have happened too many times, which means that tails have to come up, so he bets on tails. They're both wrong. The odds of the 6th throw remain the same regardless of what happened in the past. Note that this only works if the coin is fair. Story 15. The Baader-Meinhof phenomenon, otherwise known as frequency illusion or recency illusion. This phenomenon occurs when the thing you've just noticed, experienced, or been told about suddenly crops up constantly. It gives you the feeling that out of nowhere, pretty much everyone and their cousin are talking about the subject, or that it is swiftly surrounding you, and you're not crazy, you are totally seeing it more. But the thing is, of course, that's because you're noticing it more. So yes, you see your car more often because you are looking for it without even knowing. It isn't that there are more of your car out there, it's just you notice it more. Story 16. False memories. How you can implant false memories in someone over time, and they believe they are real, and their reactions are based on their own reality. Edit. Thank you guys for all the amazing responses. I know the Mandela effect, but I wanted to bring up that this happens on an individual level too, not just groups of people. Also, I have not seen the movie Inception. I don't watch a lot of movies and don't have Netflix, Hulu, or things like that. Edit 2. Thank you guys for showing me much more phenomenal information about memory. I had no clue. My own personal experience with this. When I was 9 years old, I was hospitalized with severe asthma that nearly killed me. Blood oxygen level was 62. The entire hospital stay was such a blur because my brain was not functioning properly. Both my parents were in custody battles and tried to convince me the other parent never once stepped into my hospital room. The last time I spoke with my mother, about a decade, I am sure she would still say my father never visited me. Luckily, my grandma, the voice of reason and sanity in my childhood, simply said to me, "They both visited you. They are both telling you lies." Story 17, I'm going to psych nerd out a bit since I did research on this phenomenon, but facial information processing errors associated with depression are super interesting. Folks with major depressive disorder, MDD, are actually way more likely than their peers to misidentify and selectively focus on emotional responses from other people. They have a much higher risk of misperceiving neutral faces as negative, and for missing facial cues that indicate positive information. At the same time, folks with MDD are also much better at noticing negative facial emotion indicators. Similarly, people with anxiety disorders tend to be much more likely to see neutral faces as angry. I find it really interesting because it shows how a mood disorder like depression is way more complex than we sometimes give it credit for. Information processing problems can be triggered by, and in turn, reinforce someone's depression. If we focus just on mood as our metric for what constitutes recovery, we miss some really interesting and potentially useful ways to provide treatment. Story 18, Pibloktok, or Arctic hysteria, which exists mostly among Inuit living in the Arctic region. Sufferers often become agitated, shouting and tearing off their clothes before running naked in the freezing temperatures. This continues for hours until they collapse and sleep. They have recovered by the time they wake up and may not remember the event. Interestingly, this illness also affects sled dogs and non-Inuit people. Story 19, Capgras syndrome. It's a psychiatric disorder where you believe the people around you are imposters despite recognizing that they look, act, sound the same. It can come from a disconnect between the emotional brain regions and visual regions. I believe there are cases where a patient will overcome the imposter sensation by speaking on the phone with someone, so having no visual information. I've also seen it in people who suffer from schizophrenia. I suggest a read into it if you like abnormal psych. Story 20, Phantom limb syndrome, the ability to feel sensations and even pain in a limb or limbs that no longer exist. Phantom limb syndrome is characterized by both non-painful and painful sensations. Non-painful sensations can be divided into the perception of movement and the perception of external sensations, exteroception, including touch, temperature, pressure, vibration, and itch. Pain sensations range from burning and shooting pains to feelings of tingling, pins and needles. While phantom limb syndrome occurs only in amputees, phantom sensations may be perceived in people who have survived strokes but lost function of certain body parts, or who have spinal cord injury or peripheral nerve injury. Phantom limb syndrome was first described in 1552 by French surgeon Ambroise Paré, who operated on wounded soldiers and wrote about patients who complained of pain in amputated limbs. The same syndrome was later observed and noted by French scientist, mathematician, and philosopher René Descartes, German physician Aaron Lemos, Scottish anatomist Sir Charles Bell, and American physician Silas Weir Mitchell, who tended to wounded soldiers in Philadelphia during the American Civil War. Scottish physician William Porterfield wrote a first-hand account of phantom limb syndrome in the 18th century, following the amputation of one of his legs. He was the first person to consider sensory perception as the underlying phenomenon of the syndrome. Story 21, the effect of a person's environment, expectations, and upbringing on schizophrenia. Specifically, schizophrenics that hear voices hallucinate. In a lot of societies, these voices are usually aggressive, dark, and cruel, or they simply torture the one experiencing them, calling names and undermining them. In others, usually more spiritual societies, the voices are calm, benevolent, and actively trying to help the listener. It is thought that this is the result of how those societies see the schizophrenic. In most, it's seen as a horrible mental disease, and in popular culture and media even dangerous. This stigma gives the person involved a negative view of their mental condition and causes them to internally demonize it. And exactly that creates the evil voices. They believe it is negative, so it becomes more negative. After all, the voices are a figment of their own imagination. In some cultures, schizophrenics aren't labeled that, but are seen as shamans, priests, or gifted persons with a strong spiritual connection. The voices are interpreted as guides, deceased ancestors, or even God himself. They don't perceive it as evil, so the voices do not become evil. The person hearing them doesn't suffer that much from it. Of course, feeling a sense of grandeur because of your mental state is also not a healthy thing, but for the one involved, it is a better alternative than being tortured by voices telling you you're trash, or that you should do horrible things, or just screaming, making noise. It can be treated with antipsychotics to a certain degree, but it would be lovely if one day we as a society could look at schizophrenia in a more healthy manner so that those who have it aren't as plagued by it because they have a more neutral view of it. I hope it is possible someday. Story 22, Cognitive Dissonance. If our actions don't match up with our opinions, beliefs, wishes, etc., something will give and either our actions will change or our mindset will. Doesn't sound very interesting until you use this to hack your life in a sense. Ever heard of the law of attraction? It's kind of like this. The law of attraction claims that if you want something, just pretend like you already have it. Envision that you have it and you live it. Want to lose weight? Envision you at your ideal weight every night. Sounds like complete BS, and in a sense it is, but it applies to cognitive dissonance, and if you play your cards right, it works. For me, I was a very shy person. I wanted to become talkative and get friends and guys, so I would tell myself, I'm not shy, people love me, I have tons of friends. My beliefs did not match up with my actions. I wouldn't talk to people, but eventually something gave and I started to act in accordance with my beliefs. Either you will give up on pretending or you will become how you believe yourself to be. Something to think about. The law of attraction isn't a proven thing, but cognitive dissonance is. Story 23. The amount that the words we use and think in change how we act. People who speak Spanish are less likely to blame someone for dropping something because the language is the thing was dropped rather than you dropped the thing. Australian Aborigines have no words for left, right, etc. Instead, they use north, east, south, and west. As a result, they almost always know what direction they are facing, even inside buildings with no exterior view. Deaf children in Africa using a made-up sign language had not developed signs for describing positioning under, over, to the right of, etc., and when tested, they could not find a hidden object even when they watched it be hidden. They couldn't tell themselves in their own minds where to look for it, and so they couldn't find it. Story 24. Dissociative fugues. They're pretty rare, but the idea of the brain just shutting down and allowing for reversible amnesia is so fascinating. There are documented cases of people disappearing for years at a time, starting whole new lives and not remembering anything about their past. Story 25. De-individuation. It's the loss of self-awareness in groups often attributed to mobs, and how seemingly normal people can participate in illegal behavior such as riots and lynching. You have a decreased self-evaluation of your actions, and it's as if the group shares the responsibility and not you for your actions. Story 26. The doorway effect. We've all experienced it. You need something in a different room, yet once you get there, you can't remember what it was that you needed. This is believed to be caused by passing through a doorway, which tricks our mind into thinking we have entered a new environment, and thus you subconsciously discard whatever chain of thought you had in your previous environment. It's probably useful in nature to help adapt to a sudden change in your surroundings, but it's a when you have to walk back into the other room to remember that you went in the walk-in cooler to grab tomatoes. Story 27. Taijin Kyofusho is fascinating since it is primarily a Japanese culture-specific syndrome. It's very similar to social anxiety, but instead of being afraid of embarrassing themselves or other people judging them, they are afraid of offending, embarrassing others with their appearance and bodily functions. It's more prevalent in men, but its lifetime prevalence is 313% and changes in severity throughout the lifetime. Story 28. The halo effect. Just because of how powerful it is. The first time I heard about it, I was just kind of like, yeah, of course everyone knows that, as if I knew better and I was above succumbing to it. Boy, have I realized just how much I fall prey to it too without being aware of it. It's like people just unconsciously have more goodwill and patience with good-looking people, and it's kinda hard to fight against that even when you're aware of it because it's such a visceral, instinctive reaction to be drawn to beauty. Story 29. Not sure if this counts, but synesthesia. It's when two senses cross and you experience an involuntary sensation, visual feeling in response to an unrelated cue. For example, I see colors for letters and numbers. When I see A, it's always the color of the fleshy part of a watermelon. W is always golden orange, and Q is the color of crushed blueberries. Some people can taste things in response to music. I had a friend who, when she heard classical music, always had a faint taste of strawberry cheesecake. It's insane stuff. Story 30. The first shift effect is as interesting as it is manipulative. In a group setting, if the group is trying to decide on A or B, one person can more often than not sway the majority by picking A and then B. That is, say, a group of you and your friends are trying to pick what restaurant you want to go to. Let's say the majority of your friends want to go to Subway and the minority, including you, want to go to McDonald's. It's actually in your best interest to say you want to go to Subway and then after a few moments go, well, actually, I think I want to go to McDonald's like so-and-so does because of X, Y, and Z. More often than not, you can sway the entire Subway majority into wanting to go to McDonald's. I don't have proof, but apparently this is how a lot of higher-up business and board meetings are done when a company decision comes to a stalemate. Story 31. When we have an argument or disagreement with somebody else, instead of thinking whether the other parties have a point or not, the first reaction is usually to assume that the other party is dumb and biased for failing to see our side of things. Chances are both sides are also at fault, and there's usually a way to compromise, but most people won't do that unless there's some benefits, money, involved. Notice how it's rare for people to openly argue with their bosses or superiors, but families and couples argue all the time. Story 32. I always heard this psych friend of mine talk about this thing that happens if you can have a situation created where a room is absolutely silent. He said they have one at a recording studio somewhere, like a room where you could get flatline 0 on a decibel meter. He says if you go in there, not playing an instrument or anything, but just go in and sit, you can only take a few minutes of it before you start to go crazy. Some can take more, some can take less, but something about hearing your own heartbeat start to get louder and louder clearly, and all your body noises and absence of anything else just starts to drive you nuts. I've never been, but I'd like to try it out, just so long as I could be let out when I wish. Story 33, blind sight. A person is blind but can still recognize objects in front of them because light still goes into the eyes. It still gets processed in the brain parts of the brain, like recognition still fires given what they see. The only thing they don't happen is the mental image that gets generated by that light for the conscious mind to see, thus still blind, but info is still processed. Story 34. I think Morgellons disease is pretty cool. I've been loosely following this for years. It's an unsettled mystery, I think still. It was originally thought to be merely a mass psychosis delusional thing, people scratching at open sores and finding mysterious fibers. Recently, I think studies have shown a correlation between mental deficiencies, exposure to toxins, and even tick-borne diseases. It struck, allegedly, a few notable celebs like Joni Mitchell, I think, and others. Story 35, nostalgia. Memories overall, but nostalgic moments that appear out of nowhere from a song or smell or any of the 5 senses are insane to think about sometimes. Memories are a way for us to learn from outcomes, whether going over there gets you food or you run into danger, but nostalgia is pure happiness. It usually has no rhyme or reason to it besides feeling happy in the moment.